Hello everyone, my name is Frank and you're watching Fun with Flags and History, and welcome back to our second part of the Greek Military Junta series, where today I will be talking about, of course, the abrupt rise of the Greek Military Junta, which of course took place in our last video, where I was explaining its past events such as the Greek Civil War briefly, as well as what caused it to rise to power. And today we're going to be talking about the Greek Junta itself, and what happened during this period of time. So, when the military took charge, lots of changes were made to the government itself. For one, the civil liberties that the Greek people once took for granted, such as freedom of the press and freedom of speech, were immediately suspended by the new military government. Music was also controlled to some extent, with folk music being adopted favorably by the Greek military government as a way to connect the government with the Greek national identity, which allowed for the regime to be legitimized by other nations as well as some Greek people. Not to mention, all political parties were forcibly dissolved by the government and military courts were formed by the new military government. Following the military coup, approximately 6,200 suspected communists were imprisoned or exiled to remote islands on the Greek territory. These political prisoners were then subject to constant torture by the military. Commonly used methods of torture included, but were not limited to, beating the soles of detainees' feet, choking, ripping out body hair, rape, and other forms of torture, both physical and sexual in nature. The Special Interrogation Unit of the Greek Military Police, the de facto secret police of Greece, conducted various other kinds of torture, including standing in an empty room, food and sleep deprivation, beatings, and loud sounds. A method of torture that was also done, according to recent documentation by former political prisoners of these island prisons, was that of using music as a form of torture. How this would work is the military would play popular hits from the time loudly and on loop for as long as they desired. Many international human rights organizations, including Amnesty International, have since called acts like these acts of torture. During the existence of the military government, the right to assemble was also revoked and suspended by the government. As a result, all political rallies and protests were considered illegal de facto. Surveillance was considered a fact of life even during permitted social events allowed by the military government, such as rock concerts, which was to give the military junta and the nation of Greece a much more westernized look compared to the communist Balkan nations that neighbored it. This has made citizens at the time even more fearful of the smallest mistakes that they made, as anything that the government saw as dissident-like would have had them labeled as an anarcho-communist or worse, arrested and possibly beaten or killed. The ideology of the military junta in the eyes of the military government led by Colonel Georgios Papadopoulos was simple. Colonel Papadopoulos and his military government saw the nation of Greece as a person with a broken leg, and their government was the cast to help the government heal. This was further exaggerated in a more direct phrase, calling their coup not a coup, but rather a revolution. Early in the days of the revolution, Papadopoulos and his men saw themselves as Aprilians, referring to the month of the coup that took place in 1967. Despite the king being complacent in the activities of the military junta, the king and these colonels had an uneasy relationship between each other. Colonel Papadopoulos and his government was not willing to share power with the young king, while King Constantine II did not agree to be a figurehead for the government. Although the colonel's strong anti-communist, pro-NATO, and pro-Western views appealed to the United States, President Lyndon B. Johnson, in an attempt to avoid an international backlash, told Constantine that it would be best to replace the junta. Constantine took that as a way to develop a counter-coup, so he did. On December 13th, 1967, King Constantine II of Greece conspired a plan to get himself back into power and push away the junta. Constantine would fly to the small northern city of Kavala to form a counterattack with loyalist military figures who he believed would be there to support him. He and his army would then take the city of Thessaloniki, Greece's second largest city, to form an alternative administration within Greece's borders. Constantine II had hoped that this, through international pressure, would force the junta to resign. However, this would later show that this coup would flop harder than a theatrical film during a pandemic. Here's how. For starters, despite having a decent following in the city of Kavala, including a sympathetic general, he blindly assumed that the military, sympathetic to the king, would follow the orders of a general. This was not the case. In the circumstances, middle-ranking pro-junta officers neutralized and arrested Constantine's royalist generals and took command of their units, and subsequently put together a force to advance on Kavala to arrest the king. Realizing that the counter-coup had failed, Constantine fled Greece on board the royal plane, taking his family and the helpless Kolias with him. They landed in Rome early on the morning of December 14th. Constantine remained in exile during the remainder of military rule. Although he subsequently returned to Greece, the abolition of the monarchy in 1973 removed his status as king. The flight of Constantine and Kolias left Greece with no legal government or head of state. This did not concern the military junta. Instead, the Revolutionary Council, consisted of Patakos, Papadopoulos, and Makarezos, appointed another member to the military administration, Military General Georgios Zoitikis, as regent. Zoitikis then appointed Papadopoulos as prime minister. This became the only government of Greece following the failure of the king's attempted counter-coup, as Constantine was unwilling to set up an alternative administration in exile. At the time of the coup, the Italian far right was well impressed with the rise of the military government, including neo-fascists that would later take part in the botched Borghese coup. But that is another video for another time. In April 1968, Papadopoulos invited 50 members of the Italian far right on a Greek tour to demonstrate the junta's methods. Invitees included Stefano Della Chiaie and members of Ordine Nuovo, Avanguardia Nazionale, Europa Civiltà, and FUAN La Caravella. The Italians were impressed. Upon returning to their country, they escalated their political violence, embarking on a terror campaign of bombings and other violence which killed and injured hundreds. Afterwards, the right-wing instigators of this violence blamed the communists, as per usual. With the junta's anti-democratic rise to power, there would be opposition to the regime, as with any anti-democratic dictatorship. The democratic elements of Greek society opposed the Greek military junta fiercely, as shown by their actions throughout the existence of the military junta from 1967 to 1974. The wide range of political elements against the Greek military junta included the full left wing and previously outlawed Communist Party of Greece. Some militant groups in and outside of Greece formed to show opposition to Colonel Papadopoulos and his military government. These groups included the Pan-Hellenic Liberation Movement, Democratic Defense, and the Socialist Democratic Union. The first armed militant action against the regime was started by Alexandros Panagoulis when he attempted to assassinate Colonel Papadopoulos, the head of state, during this government era. The assassination attempt to assassinate Colonel Papadopoulos started on August 13th. During that day, Colonel Papadopoulos was headed towards his summer home in Lagonisi from Athens, the capital of Greece. Colonel Papadopoulos was escorted by personal security detail, which used motorcycles and other motor vehicles to escort Colonel Papadopoulos. Panagoulis attempted to assassinate Papadopoulos by using a car bomb. However, the bomb had failed to assassinate the colonel. Panagoulis was captured later on when he was found in a sea cave waiting for a boat that would let him escape from the scene of the attempted assassination. During this time, the Greek military police questioned Panagoulis, interrogated him intensely, as well as tortured him. Later on November 17, 1968, Panagoulis was sentenced to death. As the junta carried on in existence, the government was beginning to show signs of collapse. Even though Papadopoulos held his position as dictator, he did believe in liberalization and eventual democratic transition. However, factions were beginning to form against Papadopoulos, as his democratic reforms were beginning to go against the original ideas of the regime. Papadopoulos, as early as 1968, was willing to show reform. However, these hardliners were against him from the start. Papadopoulos attempted to pass reforms in 1968, 1969, and 1970. When his attempted reform failed, Colonel Papadopoulos attempted and threatened to resign from his post as head of government. However, one thing that Papadopoulos was able to establish during his time was a proto-parliament that would have transitioned the government from a revolution, which was the junta speak for the dictatorship that existed in Greece at the time, into a regime. This parliament was called the Simulevtiki Epitropi, or Advisory Council in Greek. The council room was composed of elected members. However, these people were only elected because they were supporters of the current government that was in power. Even though this council only consisted of supporters of the regime, it was bicameral. The Advisory Council consisted of the Central Advisory Council and the Provincial Advisory Council. These two councils met with the dictator in Athens to advise Papadopoulos on how to move forward in Greece. And while Papadopoulos had done these reforms to seemingly democratize the regime, as Papadopoulos would have put it, the real reason that Papadopoulos did this was to legitimize his rule and to secure a grasp on the position of head of state. One major thing that Colonel Papadopoulos had done to legitimize his rule was through the rigged referendum in 1973 that dissolved the monarchy of Greece and turned the Kingdom of Greece into the Greek Republic, making Papadopoulos its official president. Papadopoulos was also tempted to create a constitution which would have given him the almost dictatorial powers that Papadopoulos had held in his office. His rule as president, however, would not last long. Even though Papadopoulos had made attempts to reform his government, the Greek people were not convinced, especially the students and intelligentsia, as shown by the Greek Polytechnic Uprising of 1973. The cause of this uprising were simple. Sentiments of anti-junta activity were always active from the beginning in colleges. One way through this was that the regime antagonized students through the banning of student elections in universities and drafting them into the student union, the EFEE. Not to mention, the reason that these students also protested was that student protests were always strong in Greece's history, even before the junta's existence. Papadopoulos attempted to discredit and destroy this movement, but of course these attempts proved to be futile. Since the liberalization Papadopoulos had allowed these students to organize more efficiently. In the early hours of Saturday, November 17, 1973, Papadopoulos sent the army to suppress the student strike and sit-in of the Elefteri Polyorkimeni, or the Free Besieged, as the students called themselves, at the Athens Polytechnic, which had commenced on November 14th. Shortly after 3 a.m. EET, under almost complete cover of darkness, an AMX-30 tank crashed through the rail gate of the Athens Polytechnic with subsequent loss of life. The army also occupied Syntagma Square for at least the following day. Even the sidewalk cafes were closed. With the Polytechnic Uprising in 1973, as well as a mutiny by the Greek Navy, this put an end to Papadopoulos' attempts at his liberalization and reform. On 1973, November 25th, Brigadier Dimitrios Ioannidis, a disgruntled military junta hardliner and longtime protege of Colonel Papadopoulos, launched a counter-coup against Colonel Papadopoulos and seized power. With the removal of Colonel Papadopoulos from his position as president of Greece, this allowed Ioannidis to seize power and to take a new position for the junta. Well, guys, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I do apologize for the great delays that I have made as creator of this channel. This was mainly due to the fact that I had lots of activity outside of the channel that, of course, prevented me from really working on this channel since I've got school as well as work down here in Costa Rica. But of course, I'm back and I'm willing to make more content on a much more regular basis, although things will be a little bit stripped down due to the fact that my internet connection is not very great down here. But if you would like to support the channel, of course, give it a like, give it a thumbs up. Be sure to comment your thoughts down below, any topics that you might be interested in seeing or what you would like to see new for the channel. And of course, if you would also like to support the channel, I would greatly appreciate you subscribing and clicking the notification bell so you know exactly when I'll be uploading. Of course, subscribing is the best way you can support the channel right now, as I don't make any money off of this. I'm just doing this out of my own passion, for free. So, of course, if you do choose to support the channel and subscribe, I greatly appreciate it. Anyways, guys, this is, of course, Frank Perry of Fun with Flags and History, signing off. Have a good one.